Please be seated. I thought that since this was my first time preaching for you today, I would let you know something about myself. So I'm going to tell you how I picked which college I decided to go to, which is kind of an embarrassing story, but I trust y'all to love me anyway after I tell you this story. So during the summer between my junior and senior year of high school, my best friend's mom packed us up into her station wagon and drove us basically up and down the East Coast for a week. We went through Georgia, of course, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, and we made our final stop in Washington, D.C., and then made our way back down. We looked at 10 to 12 colleges and universities during that week, and it was such an overwhelming trip of excitement and possibilities and decisions. And I ended up choosing the second college that we stopped at, Wofford College in Spartanburg, South Carolina. In fact, I was so sure that's where I wanted to go that that's the only place I applied. Put all my eggs in that one basket, which I do not recommend. Luckily, it worked out for me. Now here's the embarrassing part. I would love to tell you that I made that decision based on the median SAT score of the college, or they had the sport I wanted to play, or that I got a great scholarship there. But it all rested on three things. One, I didn't have to take the ACT to go there, just the SAT, so that was a big plus for me. Two, it was United Methodist, and that was important to me. And here's the weird part. Three, there was this tree in the middle of campus. And when I saw that tree, I said, I can see myself studying every day under that tree, and that's where I'm going to go to college. I also don't recommend picking a college based on a tree, but it worked out for me. It was a great 4 years of my life, and I can also tell you that never once did I sit under that tree and study. Maybe I'll go back sometime. I've been thinking about that a lot lately because I have a niece who is a senior in high school, and she is going through that same process right now. However, our decision-making process could not be further apart. She is putting so much pressure on this one decision that she's getting physically sick sometimes from the pressure she's putting on herself. And when I call her and talk to her about it, she just keeps saying, this is the most important decision I will ever make in my life, and if I make the wrong one, my life is ruined. Well, of course it's a big decision. I keep trying to explain to her that her life will not be ruined if it's the wrong choice. She just picks another school the next semester, and it's going to work out fine. But she has all this pressure on this decision because she has made this the one decision that could make her life go a certain way. We make decisions every day, don't we? Some are more important than others. But this passage today is about the question and the decision that I think is truly the most important decision we can make in our life. The one decision that really will affect not only our life here on earth, but our life eternal. And that is the question and decision that Pontius Pilate asked the crowd in verse 22. He said, "What should I do then with Jesus called Christ?" What do I do then with Jesus called Christ? What do we do with Jesus? That, my friends, is the question that we have to answer during this season of Lent. What do we do with Jesus? And that decision will make all the difference. Now, Pilate did not do well with that decision, did he? Pilate was the Roman governor at the time who was appointed by and answerable to Caesar. The Jewish people were under Roman rule, but they were allowed to rule themselves in certain judicial decisions, but they could not put anyone to death. And thus, Pilate comes into this story because the Sanhedrin at the time wanted Jesus to die. And so they knew the only way they could get that to happen was for Pilate to sentence him to death. So they have to charge Jesus with something political for Pilate to even care. So they basically charge him with treason. They say he's a revolutionary. He's trying to overthrow the government, Pilate. This man should be put to death. But right away, Pilate is suspicious. Now, Pilate and the Jews had a terrible relationship at the time. There's one story that says Pilate was trying to get an aqueduct funded, and so he took some money from the temple. And when thousands and thousands of Jewish people came to Pilate's home to protest, the way Pilate handled it was that he put all of his guards in plain clothes and dressed them as the townspeople and dispersed them among the crowds. And then at the right time, he gave the signal, and those guards started just slaughtering everyone around them. Thousands of Jewish people died. The Jewish people and Pilate did not have a good relationship. And so when they come to Pilate and they say, "We need a favor. We need you to put this guy to death," he's automatically suspicious. So he automatically is not assuming that Jesus is guilty. And so he starts to question him. And Jesus doesn't respond in the same way that the prisoners do that Pilate is used to. He doesn't give every excuse in the book about why he is innocent. He doesn't blame the mob outside for coming up with an unjust thing that he is guilty of. In fact, Jesus' entire demeanor stuns Pilate. And Pilate knows something else is going on here. He knows this man is not guilty of treason, and so Pilate starts asking Jesus question after question, just begging Jesus to give him any morsel of something he can use to say this man is innocent. But the passage shows us that Jesus doesn't really help Pilate out, does he? He sits there and doesn't give direct answers, or he doesn't say anything at all. Matthew makes sure that we know that Pilate thought Jesus was innocent. Verse after verse, it's Matthew trying to say Pilate knew this guy was innocent. And then we get that verse where Pilate's wife comes in, and she tells her husband, "Don't have anything to do with this man. I just had a dream, and he is innocent." Again, Matthew's saying Jesus is innocent, and Pilate knows it. And we wait. If you're like me, every time I hear this story, I hope that something will change and Pilate will change his mind and do the right thing. And I keep thinking, Pilate, do the right thing. You know that Jesus is innocent. But like when we watch our favorite movies and the characters mess up in the same way every time, Pilate stays the course. He's not given any reason by Jesus to say that he is innocent. So he tries another tactic. And since it was the tradition that one prisoner be released during the festival, Pilate goes out and he says, "Okay, I'm giving you two choices. You have Jesus Barabbas, who was known to be the most violent, hated criminal in the land, or you have Jesus the Christ. Who do you want me to release for you?" And what does the crowd say? They yell, "Barabbas. We want Barabbas." Because the Sanhedrin had gone through the crowd and they started riling them up and telling them just all these awful things about Jesus and saying, "We got to get him." And so Pilate again says that question, "Well, what do you want me to do with Jesus called Christ?" And he calls him Christ to recognize that there's something about this man that is more than just what they think he is. And so the crowd then yells, "Crucify him, kill him." And they just won't stop. And at that moment, Pilate knows he has a choice, that he has to make a choice. He either goes with the crowd and puts the innocent man to death, and not just an innocent man, but by now I think Pilate knows there's something special about Jesus. So he either goes with the crowd and puts Jesus to death and saves his job, or he tells the crowd to forget it, I'm the ruler, I'll make the decision, and I think he's innocent, and saves Jesus. But Pilate knows that if he does that, that angry mob will get word back to Caesar of what he has done. Pilate will lose his job, he'll lose his authority, he'll lose his prestige, he'll lose everything. And that's the decision he has to make. Now, I have never been anywhere near Pilate's shoes, but every time I read this story, I think about my experience my freshman year of college on sorority bid day. Now, Wofford, where I chose to go, at the time it was quite small. It was 1,000 students. And so the first day you get there, you start the sorority rush process. And I knew going to college that I really wasn't that interested in a sorority because it was so small and I just didn't think it was that important for me at the time. But of course, everyone goes through rush, so I kept an open mind. And at the end of the week, bid day came. And I still knew I wasn't going to join a sorority, and I was totally fine with that. But on bid day, what happened at that time is you gathered all the freshman girls in the big building on campus. It was called Old Main. And you're sitting in the auditorium, and then at the bottom of the stairs outside are all three. I told you it was a small school. There were 3 sororities. So the sororities are at the bottom of this big, long staircase. And they're screaming, and they're making music, and they're doing all their cheers. And so when your name is called inside, you receive your bid, and then you have 2 choices. If you want to accept your bid to the sorority, you open up the main doors to the cheering crowd, and you run down the steps to your sorority of choice. And they open their arms, and they're yelling your name, and you feel like the most important person in the world. Or, if you decide not to accept your bid, you turn to your left and you go down this indoor staircase alone and walk out the back door of the main building, around the campus the back way, back to your dorm alone. So my name is called. I knew I wasn't going to join a sorority, and I look down and I see the sorority that I had been matched with, and I look to my left, and I see that lonely, I don't, in my head, they don't even turn the lights on the staircase. You know, I'm sure they don't do that, but there's this long staircase down to the back door. And then I turn and I hear the crowds cheering and the people wanting to accept you. And what do you think I did? I walked out those front doors and I ran down the steps into the opening arms of a sorority. Now, I knew that wasn't the right decision. I knew that. I told everyone I knew that wasn't the right decision. But when faced with the reality of going alone down this staircase or walking outside and having 50 people automatically love me, I went with the crowd. Now, 2 hours later, I had already depledged. I was the shortest-lived Theta pledge in the history of the world. Because once the music and the crowds and the cheering died down, I was like, oh yeah, that's not exactly what I was supposed to do. But I was in that moment. I wanted to be a part of that crowd at that time. Pilate was in that moment. He knew Jesus was innocent. He knew it. Matthew tells us over and over, Pilate knows this man is innocent, and yet when faced with the decision of going with the crowd or facing alienation and the loss of everything, he goes with the crowd. Pilate knew he couldn't please the people and save Jesus, and that if he made that commitment to Christ, then he was going to have to risk rejection and alienation. And he could not face that. So he washes his hands of the guilt and thinks that's okay. And he leaves it to the crowd to decide. Friends, this is the decision we have to make. We have to decide if we are like Pilate, because in my opinion, we're not that far removed from Pilate in our daily lives. Believe it or not, that character that we so despise, that could be us. And if we aren't careful, we will end up being Pilate. In fact, I'm sure almost everyone in this room has been Pilate in some way or another at some time in their life, because anytime we put ourselves, our career, or any other priority above Christ, we are being Pilate. We have to answer that question, what do I do with Jesus who is called Christ? And again, we're here, we're at church, so I dare say we have all said we want to follow Jesus. We want to follow Christ. We want to follow him. And yet, we have to continuously answer that question in our decision making every day. We can't let ourselves be comfortable thinking we've made that decision, so we're okay, let's move on. If we hear, what do I want to do with Jesus? And our answer wants to be, we want to be fully devoted followers of Christ, then we have to be willing to do what Pilate wasn't. We have to be willing to sometimes know that our decisions means that we will be taking a staircase alone rather than going with the crowd. That we will alienate people we love with our choices, and we have to be willing to do that even when it's scary, even when we don't want to, and rely on God to get us through that. That all of our decisions stem from the decision to this question, and sometimes they are easy, and sometimes you don't even have to think about them, but sometimes they are hard. Sometimes we think the decisions don't have anything to do with that answer, but I think we're kidding ourselves. Anytime we put priorities above worship, anytime that we pick an errand or a TV show above daily devotional time with God, we're making a decision. Anytime we put an excuse in front of a reason not to pray, we're making that decision. If we allow any other schedule in our life to dictate our church schedule, we dictate that decision. If we don't talk about God at home with our children and grandchildren or friends, we're making a decision. If we decide to save as much money as we can or spend it on that thing we really, really want and overlook tithing or giving to the church, we're making that decision. When we make those decisions, we are condemning Christ, whether we think we are or not. What do we do with this Jesus who is called Christ? That is the question not only at the heart of Lent, but really at the heart of Christianity, at the heart of our lives. This is the question that separates us from Pilate, or makes us know we are Pilate. Do we succumb to the crowd and be comfortable with our answers, or do we follow Christ's example, who knew he was about to die, who knew it had to happen, and yet he sat there in silence. And through his silence, he said, yes, I choose to accept this fate. Yes, I choose to be flogged and beaten. Yes, I choose to be spit upon. Yes, I choose to be hated because I am choosing God. Do we believe in God and Christ enough to answer the question and be ready to take whatever comes our way because of that decision the way Christ did? What will we let these last 2 weeks of Lent mean for us with that decision? We are on the road of the week that changed the world. And yet we must continuously ask on this road and the roads beyond, what will I do with Jesus called Christ? I pray that we answer it in a way that we live our lives for Christ, and in a way that not only changes us, but has the ability to change the world. Amen. The doors of Dunwoody United Methodist Church are now open for anyone who would like to join through profession of faith for training.